All right, thanks for staying with us. Even as we continue to look at various aspects of the economy, you are watching Daybreak. Let me just reintroduce my guests once again. We have Joy Kiru, an economist and lecturer at UON. Ken Gishinga, who's a chief economist at Mentoria Economics, together with Joyce Njogu, head of consulting and business development at the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Joyce, thanks for joining us this morning. I'm sure you've had a chance to listen to what the other guests have had to say, especially in regards to the taxation discussion in this country. Now, we know that for manufacturing, it's not, the last couple of years have not been the greatest. For example, I read here that manufacturing as a share of GDP had fallen between 2013 and 2017 by about 2 points, from 11% to about 8.4%. The last time I checked, there had been a target of up to about 15%, which seems to be a moving target. What are the challenges that you would say in 2021 as we begin to look beyond the COVID disruption season? I'm not saying we're out of it yet, that you say manufacturing is facing, and how do factors like taxation affect the cost of manufacturing in this country?
Well, thank you. You're right. Currently, we have an ambition as a country, which is almost coming to an end, on the Big Four agenda, where manufacturing should contribute at least 15% of the GDP. The most recent report last year indicated that we are at 7.6%. So a drop from, yes, a drop from 11% over 4 or 5 years ago. So this means there are some things that are not going right. We are not aligning our ambitions with the kind of incentives that we are creating, or a business environment that can help manufacturers thrive. So we have a few challenges. Of course, taxation as the main topic being one of the biggest challenges. We've had a lot of engagements with government on how to build on the budgets, for instance. And I must congratulate government in terms of engaging manufacturers sector by sector on how we build on different areas of budgeting. But again, we have a challenge in terms of the kind of taxations that are coming. We need long-term stability on the fiscal policy. So every year there are changes to the fiscal policies, and those affect how people invest, especially manufacturers. Manufacturing is a place where there's a lot of long-term investments, whether you're purchasing equipment or you're looking at bringing in certain types of innovations. We are there for the long haul. So if policies are fluctuating, it increases cost of business tremendously. And there are different types of taxation areas that, of course, are affecting manufacturers, whether you're looking at import, exports, excess duties like you mentioned earlier. We are also looking at just the most recent electricity. You'll find almost 45% goes to tax just on the electricity cost. And that alone, manufacturing being a heavy energy consuming sector, you can imagine how the cost of business goes up on such things. So I know in 2020 there were some incentives to reduce tax, like the VATs and others, that really went a long way into increasing liquidity in the market. Because again, if liquidity is affected, consumers, households have no money, then they cannot buy the goods and their lifestyle is affected. Hence, then we are affected in how we grow as a manufacturing sector. So if there's low spending power, manufacturing sector will not grow. Supply chain constraints, we've been struggling, of course, even before COVID, on the efficiencies of supply chain and the global competitiveness around how we access raw materials and how we export. And being an export-led, one of the areas of making manufacturing really grow is focusing on exports. We have different challenges on how we coordinate our agreements and the kind of taxes that come in through different destination markets, and also cheap imports that come in. So there are so many challenges affecting the counterfeits, low products, and just competing in this market is quite difficult for a manufacturer. So cost of production in Kenya is quite high, I must say. And then you find a lot of manufacturers really going down in terms of growth trajectories. Levels of employment are affected, and you find then achieving that 15% becomes a dream.
It sounds like there's almost no good news. But let me ask you this. I've listened to you and I'm a little bit depressed. What are other African countries doing that we could learn? Sometimes it's hard to benchmark with the West because the setting is completely different. And some of them have had democracy for many years. They've had a chance to make mistakes and learn. We are a much younger democracy, much younger in terms of our governance and how we organize ourselves as a nation. Anything we could learn from the rest of the African continent? I'm sure, Kam, you benchmark with other nations?
Well, we've looked at different economies. Some of them are growing heavily in terms of innovations and taking advantage of their competitive advantage in terms of natural resources and access to certain markets where they have good negotiations and trade agreements. But I know in Kenya, we also negotiate from a perspective we want sustainable growth. So some countries like Ethiopia will benefit from government subsidies. But in Kenya, we question are subsidies sustainable, and where can we bring in incentives or some level of subsidies in, let's say, green fields, so that, you know, those areas can grow. But in traditional sectors that need growth, really we just need stable policies, not just taxation. There are many other our trade policies, our investment policies. There are many other policies that are intertwined. So if there's a way all these instruments, legal instruments, can speak to each other, so that whether it's from a finance perspective, a trade perspective, an investment perspective, they're aligned, and they give us a synergy in how then we progress with different stakeholders to grow the sector. Manufacturing does not exist in isolation. So when education is growing, the service sector is growing, banking sector is growing, and they're able to provide, for instance, affordable financing, then generally the sector grows. But it's not all bad. We have seen growth also in terms of manufacturing outputs. So manufacturing outputs are growing. We have new businesses coming in. The small businesses are quite innovative, and they're also crying for some taxation, you know, policies that are favorable to them to enhance their growth. So in terms of African continent, yes, we have some economies that are thriving for various reasons, the Egypt and the others.
Specifically, the manufacturing part is thriving within the economy.
Yes, but also there are some countries that are not strong in manufacturing, and we take that as an opportunity for the Kenyan products to be able to also share our products with them in terms of exports. We also import raw materials across. So the African continental free trade area is going to give us a very good opportunity to trade amongst Africa and kind of equalize and harmonize most of these policies, whether it's taxation, competition, and others. But maybe we can learn from Asian economies and the way who are almost closer to us more than the developed world on how they are working on their budgeting and fiscal policies. But generally in Kenya, we say, I had joy talking about how do we keep taxing the same people. We are okay with widening the tax base, looking for, you know, the informal sector, formalizing them, and those that really are not necessarily in the tax space to be brought in, but not overtaxing those who are already paying a lot of taxes. Then that increases the tax burden. But we also say Kenya has money. So when we are doing budgeting and how we factor in our expenditure, how then do we make sure we are optimizing the funds that are already there and, you know, reducing debt levels? How do we borrow? What's our policy around borrowing? Do we just borrow again to pay debts, borrow again to pay the same debts that we had borrowed? How exactly are we managing our existing finances?
I think some very interesting questions that you asked this morning. I'd like to get a reaction from each of my guests. Ken, let me start with you. The manufacturing conversation, I may not have worked for as long a time as others have, but it's the same issues have been canvassed in this studio since I can remember. And when you look at data from 10 years ago that talks about our numbers continuously going down, you ask yourself, what are we doing differently? What do we need to do differently to get out?
Well, I think, Wahiga, you said something that comes up quite a lot in policy discussions around our comparative economics. Should we look at the West? And to your point, you said the West is a whole different ballgame. But my assessment is Kenya is #1 in mobile money. We are almost #1 in athletics. So there should be no reason why we shouldn't be able to benchmark with the giants of this world, the United States, Japan, Germany. If you look at China, in the last 40 years, China was a very poor society, but China has even overtaken the United States in terms of manufacturing. So I don't think we should shy away in terms of benchmarking with those giants. And I think the lessons we can learn, and I think Joe has put it very well, it starts from a very early age, from the education system. Do we have the right STEM policies? You know, every time I look at KCSE candidates being interviewed, the best students, I rarely hear any of them saying, I want to be a manufacturer. You know, it's always, I want to be a doctor or a pilot. So it tells you from a very early age, it's not in our psyche. And I was just reflecting on it before I came here. And I thought, you know, we had the Nyayo Pioneer car in the early 90s, and we mocked it because it didn't look like what we expect a car to be. But had we improved on it, maybe every 5 years, right now we would have been in the 5th generation model. And possibly we would have been. So I think it's a whole conversation on, first of all, our DNA, because our economic model has been, let's produce raw materials, let's export to the West, let's import it. It's been ingrained in many other African countries, and that's why I don't like this whole idea of let's benchmark with other African countries, because they are along those lines. I think we need to ask ourselves, how did the Chinas, how did the South Koreas, countries that used to benchmark with Kenya in the 60s, how did they be able to move there? And I think it's a big chunk is the curricula. Our engineering systems have to be very integrated with industry, and we need to start being consistent where from one presidential candidate to the next, there has to be that consistency. So if it was a Nyayo pioneer during the Moi days, it should have proceeded into the Kibaki days, to the Uhuru days, and right now we'd possibly be talking of a car that can compete with the Japanese. So it's a long-term, as Joya said, there's a long-term commitment to it.
Okay. Well, I don't want to say wishful thinking, but really many hope that would have been the reality. Joy, let me allow you to also weigh in before we switch gears. Yes, and just get your thoughts on the manufacturing concerns, the vision that's been set for 15%, something that's in Vision 2030. And as we get closer and closer to 2030, she unfortunately has reminded us that we are now at 7.4%.
Okay, what is manufacturing? It's about producing. It's about originating goods and services. For what? For people to use. When you are building whatever it is that you're producing, whether it's a dress, whether it's a pen, whether it's a plastic material, whether it's a piece of clothing, you are hoping that somebody out there will buy it. Somebody will only buy it if they have the money, number one. Now, if these policies are not coordinated, like the taxation policy, if you keep taxing these commodities, then you are depressing the demand for goods and services who you are also asking people to produce. So in other words, you are asking manufacturers to invest, and you are not supporting the investments by encouraging or by creating an enabling environment for the consumers to buy the same goods. So there is again that policy contradiction. Again, manufacturing, again, is not just about the domestic markets, it's also about trade and external trade. And now that is now where the issue is talking about benchmarking and all that comes into place. I tend to disagree a bit because now it's about comparative advantage when it comes to trading partners. Who is it that we can trade with and at the lowest opportunity cost to us? You see, if you want to go into high-tech manufacturing of maybe like the Nyayo car, like you put it, or some other high-tech manufactured products like cars and other tech goods like TVs and all that, we know that you may not have the comparative advantage in terms of even the capital, even in terms of technical know-how. So if you want to go into that, it's okay, but you know that we are going to be doing it at a high cost than our competitors out there. And that means that now, and then now the duties, she'll tell you about exports. There are the tariffs, and there are these phytosanitary clauses which makes you manufacture, which force you rather, which want to set a standard to which you can be able to export to a cream market like the EU or the US and the UK. Now, in that case, it means that because of those kind of conditions, at our Del Monte, no matter how much you enjoy it, may not sit on a table in Berlin and be enjoyed by a German, because the standards will never allow us to take it there, and again, the tariffs will never allow us to take it there. It's going to be impossible. But of course, Congolese, Kinshasa may have an opportunity to take Del Monte if we try to encourage intra-Africa trade, you know, by making it easier for us to trade with each other, because it's really a big untapped market in Africa. And we can have rules of trade that encourage our own manufacturing systems. So yes, the situation in the world, the bar has been set so high for us, we cannot access those premium markets with our manufactured products. But of course, there are Nigerians in Abuja, there are Malawians in Lilongwe who would very much be happy to take Del Monte made in Kenya and other made in Kenya products. So intra-Africa trade will help us really expand the markets and also encourage our manufacturing, much as you are trying to make the policies conducive for more consumption of locally produced goods.